All right, so we're going to jump right into session 10. So I invite you to turn to page 86. What we're doing on this last one is a real man betters God's world. So we have looked through our entire definition. You think about that compass. To the north, it's courageously follows God's word. Then you got to the east and the west, you've got a man and his wife, a man and his work. And so now we're going into bettering God's world. Some of you may not have kids. Some of you may never have kids. There's still good stuff in here for all of us. If you don't have kids yet or you got small kids, I've already had people last Wednesday say, man, I wish I had this 20 years ago. I wish I had this back then. You're the back then for some of them. And so you get to hear some of these things that just really help about being a dad as we get into this. And so as we get started with session 10, it talks about a man and his children. And the first thing we see about this when we're looking at God's first recorded command in the Bible, first chapter, first book of the Bible, the first command, be a dad. You look all the way back to Genesis 1:28, it says, God said to the man and the woman, be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth and fill it. So you got two of our basically hard wirings as men, subdue the land, and then as well as be fruitful. And so there should be a generation beyond. And we'll talk a lot about this, but you're talking about leaving a legacy. Most of us can't remember our great-grandfather's middle name, for instance. Your great-great-grandfather, for sure, it's very rare unless you're just a genealogy buff that you remember those names. So we're not going to be remembered in 2 to 3 generations, but our impact can. This is where raising this next generation, especially for that, through that. And so when you talk about being a dad here, it's not that you have to. You think Jesus never had kids. Paul, the Apostle Paul, never had kids. He was married but didn't have kids. And so, no, that was Peter. I don't know if Peter had kids. Paul didn't have kids. That's all I know. I don't think he was married. Peter had a mother-in-law, so he was married. That's as far as I can take you. But when you think about this idea of looking at children and understanding where we go from there, you think about when we first met, that first session or two, we were talking about what is a man. We started sharing our story, and it's like, I never had anybody to teach me what it meant to be a man. I didn't have that guy in my life to invest in me. You know, what happens in 10, 20, and 30 years from now when our kids are sitting in a group going through something like this and people are saying, man, I didn't have anybody to teach me that. They didn't show me and encourage me, and your kids are going, that's not my story. Like, I had a dad who taught me what it meant to be a man. He helped me understand that bigger picture. You know, we're getting to go ahead and invest for the future, but not just for boys, but for girls as well. Like, I only have girls. And so unless the boy takes their last name, which I'm not going to allow them to marry a guy that does that. I know a guy, his family was so messed up, he took her name because she liked hers and he didn't care. If that's the problem, we're probably going to have some more conversations before we get married at that point. But my name ends with me. There's plenty of Davises out there making more Davises, so I'm not worried about that. But like my legacy will be through those 2 daughters and the father figure role that I have in other young men's lives as well. And so the first part is to be a dad. The second thing we see about a man and his children. Children are given by God to enrich a man's life in a multitude of ways. It's interesting here, Psalm 127, behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. But then notice this quote. This is from Teddy Roosevelt. I've got his quote about the man in the arena in my office. But he was a Rough Rider. He was a police officer. President. He did all kinds of stuff. He was a big game hunter. He's the reason we have some of our national parks. He's done all these great things. And look at what he says right there in that quote. For unflagging interest and enjoyment, a household of children certainly makes all other forms of success and achievement lose their importance by comparison. You mean that big moose he's got on the wall? You know, he said children were the most, it makes everything else pale in comparison. So just seeing how it enriches us through that. And then C, children give a dad a way to make some of his most significant and enduring contributions for bettering the world. Your legacy is lived out through your kids through that. There was a quote by Neil Postman. He said, children are a way to reach the future, a future you will never see. That's how you make an impact in it. He just talks a lot about this idea. And you might be saying, well, my children are raised. What do I do? Those kind of things. It's not too late, and we're going to see some of that in here as well. And so that's why point D, there's a challenge every dad faces, and that's to launch well-adjusted difference makers. You see that on page 87. And it says, as we learned in session 4, it requires more than being a good dad. We need to be a smart dad. The idea of being a smart dad. We've already looked at all of those, but one dad says, I'm proud of you because of this. I love you because of that. The smart dad says, I love you, period. You don't put the strings to it, so they don't realize, they don't learn that dad's love is based on my performance, those kind of things. It's those little moves that can be pivotal in our life, and that's what we've been talking about in each of these. So we're going to jump right into this idea of what your children would say they need most from you as a dad. This is 10 things that they're going to, if our children could speak about these things, or what we would say, what research has said, this is what they would tell us. And so the first thing is, Dad, I need you and Mom to be there for me in early years. So it says that studies have shown that strong nurturing environments in the opening years of a child's life, along with lots of face-to-face interaction with mom and dad, is essential to healthy brain and personality development. And it goes on, that next quote talks about basically 85% of a person's ultimate personality is formed by the time he or she is 6 years old. So some of us were like, whoop, missed that one. There's still time, there's ways to build off of that. But the children that have limited physical and emotional attention from busy or absent parents will struggle later on. And so as you look through here, dads far more than moms wound their children when they're absent like that. And we've talked a lot about the absent father wound out of this. But the brain's starting to hardwire, and neural connections are being made, and that interaction is what helps form those healthy pathways in that. When you look through this, there were 2 main things that this one guy was talking about in the early years that you need to give your kids: FaceTime and floor time. So FaceTime, we're not talking about get them on the phone and do FaceTime. He's talking about face-to-face. You're interacting with them, you're having conversations. If you've got multiple kids, to be interacting with each kid face-to-face. I talked about this in worship songs. Worship songs, a lot of hymns are written about God. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. You're talking about God at that point. Then all of a sudden the 90s hit, and all the songs started about, I want to see your face. It's like they would even take some of our songs that were hymns and change it, instead of being about God, but to God. Because there's that desire for that face-to-face connection. You got to have both when you're talking about worship songs and things like that. And we've come back around, but in the 90s, every new song was sung to God and just to God, not about God. But I think that spoke to what people desire from a father, I had one friend, he talked about his kid one time. He was looking the other way, and he took his hand and he turned his face to look at his son, because he wanted that face-to-face. That means the phone is down. You're getting real face-to-face time. And the other part of that is floor time, getting down on their level, entering into their world. And maybe you come in from work, you're tired, your back hurts, you don't really want to get down on the floor, but that's one of the most meaningful things you can do for some of your kids. And sometimes it's just you go and lay down and they crawl on you. You're exhausted, but they're just glad you're there to crawl on, for instance. Last week I came in one night, and one of my daughters is really good at puzzles, and she had pulled out one of these puzzles that we got a few years ago, and she'll pull out a puzzle every few months, and we'll do the puzzle. And by we, I mean she and her mom. And this one, though, has a special place in my heart. They bought one. It's a bunch of different types of donuts. And they just thought Daddy would love that. And I remember doing it with them one time. But I come in, she had put that puzzle out a few days before, and nobody really helped her with it. And she was just sitting there working on the puzzle. And I just got down beside her and started working the puzzle with her. I'm going to get the edges. I'm going to find the corner pieces, those kind of things. And before it's over with, all 4 of us joined in, and we were doing the puzzle together, laughing, talking. And but when nobody else was around, it was just me and my daughter, all of a sudden, she just turned and hugged me, and she said, Daddy, I love you. because that's her quality time. I got on her level. I didn't want to be there. My shoulder hurt for 2 days after it, those kind of things. But it was worth it because that's what she needs. She's a quality time girl. So spending that time with her. So face-to-face and floor time later on as they get a little older and you're not on the floor, it's the idea of being in their world, joining them with what they're into. And so as you go from that, it goes on to talk about nobody outgrows their childhood. There's a child psychologist that talks about that. Just that idea of being engaged and having fun with our kids and what they think is fun in that moment. Tell me more about that thing in Minecraft that you built. And you just sit and you listen, because they want to tell you about it and you don't care. It's not about learning about Minecraft. It's about what your kid is into and being interested in that. So here's point B. Dad, I need your discipline and instruction to be balanced with love. That's the next one of these. And so you see this chart with 4 different parenting styles on the page. And so we're just going to kind of go through these real quick and talk about it. At the top, you have high love. And then on the left and the right, you see high discipline and low discipline. And then on the bottom, you've got low love. So now all 4 of these quadrants you've got, so we'll start in the upper left corner of that. High love but low discipline would be called a permissive environment. Hey, you can do whatever you want. I love you. I'm just glad to be your parent, more wanting to be their friend than to be that disciplinarian. There's no or little discipline or instruction. The one on the far right, though, is high love and high discipline. So there's a balance of both. Then you get down to the bottom left. Low discipline and low love is considered neglectful. And then the bottom right, high discipline, but low love is authoritarian. So while you're filling that out, which do you think leads to the most well-adjusted kids when they do the studies and research? Which one do you say? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Yeah, authoritative. That's the one, because when you look at kids that come out well-balanced and you talk to them about their dad, for instance, they'll say, my dad was strict, but I knew he loved me. That was something like one guy did a research because he just kept finding these great kids and he started interviewing all of them and they all had different things going for them. But every kid in some form or fashion said he was strict, he had rules, but I knew he loved me. You had to have both of those in there. And one guy even mentioned it like a referee. Like there's not even any emotion in it, Offsides, 5-yard penalty. You hit your sister, we're going to have a conversation. I'm not going to count to 3. I'm not going to give you a warning. You can't grow up in life hitting your sister, and we're not going to do that. And there's going to be a consequence every time. You take the emotion out of that. That is one of those roles. Now, which do you think is the worst, the most damaging to a kid when you look at the other 3? I would lean toward neglectful, and it turns out it's actually authoritarian. You got rules without relationship. And you'll hear this quote from me all the time. Rules without relationship breed rebellion. The kids that have the hardest time with adjusting have high discipline but low love. Turns out the second best is permissive. You may get away with stuff, but you feel loved. And the next best was neglectful. Because that kid, at least he knows there's no one to count on. There's no one to help me. There's no one to discipline me. I've got to figure things out. But when you get that high discipline where, it's all about the rules, but there's no relationship. There's no love in that ends up causing the largest amount of problems in there. But then you look, authoritative is the one that we want to shoot for. And so you'll see some stats about it. I don't need to go there yet. So you'll see it on page 89. Children raised in authoritative homes are more likely to adopt the values of the family, respond to authority figures, and possess a high sense of personal well-being. It's not a guarantee. I've seen kids come out of tough situations turn out great. I've seen some great families and the kids didn't turn out okay, those kind of things. I get that. But you're talking about giving them the best opportunity, the best foundation for those things to happen. The authoritarian really comes out of, you wanting to make sure behavior management, but there's no relationship there and can come across as harsh. And so one of the illustrations was from John Wooden. He was the basketball coach at UCLA, considered, if not the greatest, one of the greatest coaches of all time. And he grew up in rural Indiana. And he talked about growing up with his dad, and he tells this story about going to see his dad, and the farmers would work at the gravel pits with their horses. There was nearby gravel pits, and when they weren't farming, they would go and they would haul these gravel pit loads with their horses, and they walked up on a young man, a young farmer. He had 2 horses. He was trying to pull this gravel. The horses weren't pulling. He was mad. He was yelling at them, cussing them, beating them, couldn't get them to do anything. And he said that his dad walked up and said, can I help you, young man? And he's like, sure. And he says, well, I need you to be quiet then. And he went up. He started to rub the noses on the horses, got in between them, got on the bridle, started whispering to them a little bit. Finally, he turned around and he whistled, and they pulled the gravel out the way they were supposed to. And this is what he said about that. He was just amazed watching it, but he said, I saw this over and over in different aspects of life with my dad. He said this, he says, I've never forgotten what I saw him do and how he did it. Over the years, I've seen a lot of leaders, and I would say this is true, a lot of fathers as well act like that angry young farmer who lost control. So much more can be accomplished by a dad's calm and steady approach. He said, here's the indelible lesson in my life. It takes strength on the inside to be gentle on the outside. It's easy to use your power to control your kid, to tell them, to stop these things, but to actually take the time to build that relationship, to tell them why, that's where that you move from authoritarian to the authoritative, because they know they're loved. And kids want boundaries, and they'll buck against it and stuff, but they need it. Even our foster kids that we've had value that boundary, even though they hate it. They know they've been missing it, and so they're working through that a lot of times. And so the third one, C, Dad, I need you to know my personality and to honor it. To know my personality. There's no one-size-fits-all parenting style, as it says right here. The smart dad will adjust his parenting efforts. You hear people say, we don't know. We had our first kid, and they turned out great, but the second kid, we did everything the same, and they turned out completely different, and they're rebelling against us. And that's probably the reason. That kid's probably wired a different way. They have a different personality. You've got to know each kid, and that would be your problem. Understanding their unique personalities. The sooner you understand that, the better you can connect and interact with each of your children. Avoiding unnecessary hurts. They're not intentional hurts, but what you find out is we still cause those hurts when we try to control a child or push a child in a way that doesn't motivate them, and then we all end up hurting as a result of that. So here's some resources. We're going to talk more about resources next week. I'm supposed to provide you with resources, and they've given me some resources, so I've looked through some of those, and so there'll be some good ones about that. But there's one about personality plus for parents, that you see down here. I've not read it, but helping understand your child's love languages, helping understand your child's personality can really help you in discovering how to lead your children well. And so, for instance, birth order matters. The oldest child tends to be more conscientious. They were thrown into everything first. They had to try everything first. They tend to sometimes even be more fearful as a result of that. They're not the most fearless ones. That younger one, go on, jump off that rock. I've done it before. They try things that their siblings tell them to do. They tend to do more of that. But when you start looking at their personality types, if you have a boy, for instance, that's the oldest, and then you have a younger boy, they tend to define themselves by everything that they're not like their brother. So the most horrible thing you can do or harmful thing you can do to that kid is, why can't you be more like your older brother, Johnny? They're trying to be the exact opposite sometimes. And you got to understand that that's part of understanding their personality. Birth order, when we do premarital counseling, I look at birth order because some of those clash with each other. The oldest and the youngest works really well. 2 younger children, the 2 youngest, that can be a problem sometimes. Not always, but I've seen it. And I've done the premarital. I've also had to do the marital counseling where I found out that that's what was going on in that. So understanding those different things about your kid. The next one, Dad, I need you to discover my bent and actively support it. What does it mean by bent? Well, it's from Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's how I was taught it growing up. And here's what that meant. You notice it says here, train up a child according to his bent. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. This was like, okay, I'm going to raise my kid. When they go to college, they're going to lose their mind. They're going to go hog wild. They're going to do everything that they've ever wanted. And I'm quoting this passage. I train up a child in the way they'll go. So when they're old, they'll come back to church. They'll come back to the faith. Like that was the mindset of this passage. And actually this passage is about training a child the way they're wired, the way that God has made them. And the illustration that was given was like a bow. Like you take a bow that's been bit and hardened and formed to be a certain way. And your kid is not into sports, but you're going to make them an athlete. You're going to bend that bow a little bit, right? If you bend that bow too much, it's going to break. There's a certain amount of forming that we do with our kids, but you try to change your kid's personality, for instance, their natural abilities and passions, you can actually break it when you do that. So that's understanding how God has gifted them to be. One of the ways is Ames testing. Apparently, it's really good. Robert Lewis loves it. It's down in Dallas. You fly in. We talked about that for some people for jobs, but he recommends it if you can for even your kids. But instead, being excited about what your kid is excited about. You look in your notes here. Your excitement and support as a dad for your child's natural abilities and passions is a huge factor in his or her healthy development. This is how God has shaped your kids. Maybe you need to expose them to a lot of different things. Try out sports that you didn't like. Try different, they want to try an instrument. Let them, You might have a rusty trumpet laying around after a few years because they tried a few things, but they didn't like it. But you want to give them the opportunities to really understand and find out what they like to do. Maybe they want to go hunting and you're not a hunter. Maybe they're into cars and you don't know anything about cars. That's one of the good things about having a community, a network of guys around us that can help us expose our kids to things that maybe we're not really good at through that. Try things out. And, one of the things about being in their corner is to say things like, I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited. When you see them playing a sport, instead of talking about what they did well, talk about, I get so much joy from just watching you play. Just letting them know you're proud of them. And we'll get to that more in the blessing stage, but just encouraging whatever, if they're an artist, help them understand what that looks like. Use their giftings for God's glory, for instance. If they're into skateboards, hey, maybe they go and play in the X Games and give God glory through their testimony because they really got good at skateboarding. There's different ways that our kids are wired. So part E, Dad, I need you to know too much is too much. We're going to talk about too much, 3 different areas out of this under that. And so too much control over your child's life crushes his spirit and incites rebellion. We've already mentioned that. Rules without relationship breed rebellion, but trying to control them because I said so. I was told that in times. And there's times where it's like, get out of the road. Why? Because I said so, because you just want them out of the road. But there's other times you need to explain the why. That understanding those things. But sometimes we just don't want them to make the same mistakes we did. We want to wrap them up in bubble wrap so they don't have those scars and scratches, but that's how we learned life. And then there's now a whole generation, 20-somethings, they're scared to drive. They don't even want their license. There's like massive amounts of kids. They don't know how to drive. They don't have a license. They don't want to drive. Do you know how many accidents happen every day? And part of that is because, I heard one guy talk about, he read an article in his encyclopedia about killer bees, and he was scared to go outside for like a month because of killer bees, because there's no killer bees near him, but he was exposed to it. Think about with social media. They're watching the war in Gaza, Ukraine. They're seeing all kinds of stuff. They see crazy car wrecks. They're seeing they're being exposed at a younger age, and they're very fearful of it. But also out of that, they don't want to try things, because they didn't try it when they were with their kid, with their parents, for instance. I talk about this, I hope my kids get offered things like alcohol and drugs while they're still under my home, under my roof. Because if I shelter them to the point they never get exposed to those things, and then they get tempted and asked in college, how do they deal with those? Hopefully they still have a relationship with me, but I want them to be able to say, no thanks, I don't need that. They know who they are because we've had those conversations when they're still in my house, so that they're not walking out there. Because I watched too many sheltered kids go off to college and lose their ever-loving mind. And their parents were quoting, train up a child and the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not. They were hoping that would be the verse that fixes it all, and that's not what that's about. How do we help our kids explore things, try things? Because you can crush their spirit, and they'll end up being rebellious as a result of that. The very thing you tell them they can't do, that's exactly what they're going to do the first chance they get. Some of us were like that. Too much money in your child's life will spoil them and steal them their will to succeed. They need to understand that, when you make money and you earn something, you buy it for yourself, that feeling of accomplishment. If you give them everything, they don't learn that work ethic. And so you can spoil a child in that sense. And then finally, too high expectations for your child wounds and embitters them. When you're always setting the bar higher, they come off the field, they did great, and all you can talk about is what they could have done better. You don't focus on what they did well, or just say, I'd love to see you play. There was the story of George Brett, and some of the, John Wooden, George Brett, some of you don't even know who I'm talking about. George Brett played baseball, and he was on the cusp of batting 400. First time in decades anybody batted 400. He had a few games left. He could have sat out and kept that record, but he chose to play in the games. He ends up coming up short as a result. When he walked off the field at bat in the last game, he had one of the greatest batting averages we've seen in decades. And he walked up to his dad, and you know what his dad said to him first thing? 5 more hits and you'd have had it, son. 5 more hits. And if you read through their story, you look at George Brett's biography and things like that, you'll find that that's the relationship with his dad that was always there. It was never good enough. He was always looking at what you could have done better, and it caused problems as a result of that. I may have mentioned this before, but I've also seen that those high expectations on sports especially. I've seen kids that were really talented, really good at what they did, but the parents pushed them too hard with too high expectations, and by the time they hit high school or college, they burned out on a sport that they were actually great at because they were doing it because of the parents' expectation. Their dad was decent at it, wants them to be better, and pushes them. Now, if they love it, let them. But you don't need to be the one setting too high of expectations. And so in Colossians, it says, fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they will not lose heart. Notice it doesn't mention moms in this. Moms naturally tend to be nurturing, more caring, but we tend to be the ones that push our kids into the point where it exasperates them. And so the last one is on this page is, Dad, I need you to show me what to believe by living it. Show me what to believe by living it. He says faith with no works is dead. You've got to, what you say matters, but what you do matters more. You can say things are important. We had that picture of mom and the daughter and the son headed to church, and the dad sitting there on that Sunday. It was called Sunday morning, and he was reading it, and he was reading the newspaper, and you see where the kid's eyes were. He was looking at dad. You see dad is destiny in that. He sees you living it out or not. The kids learn that, church is a place where you pretend, because dad goes and acts one way at church and he's completely different during the week. We end up scarring kids, and they end up walking away from church. When you talk to them about why don't they want to be a part of church anymore, many times they'll talk about hypocrisy. And a lot of times it's in their own family that they saw it. You will leave your children what you've lived out in the home. That was the bottom line right here on that. They know what's real or what's not, as much as you tell them. And you can tell them that you make mistakes. You can tell them about what you need to do. And so we'll get into this more as we get into this, the final thoughts and stuff, and talking about it. But part G, Dad, I need you to bless me. Every child needs dad to speak the blessing directly into his or her life. That blessing was introduced in session 4. That's a must-do for a smart dad, he says. And so things like, I love you. I'm proud of you. You're really good at, especially in the teenage years, that you're really good at what you do. That's when that really comes in. This is one thing that came all the way back from the late 90s in men's fraternity, and I've seen that impact young men's lives. I've seen that impact dads and their sons' relationship, just being able to say those things. There are 65-year-old men that would love to hear that from their dad, and they never got that blessing, and they're still trying. You see it. You see 65 and 70-year-old men and 50-year-old men still trying to get the blessing of dad, trying to live up to an expectation. And he's gone. He's buried sometimes. We're still trying to live up to it because you never got the blessing. So they need to hear it. And again, when you start telling them what they're good at, they hear, hey, dad's paying attention to me. He saw what you're good at. And then, it's not like you're good at this. I saw you doing that. I'm really proud of you. Those kinds of moments. And it really needs to be something that they're good at, because that affirmation that you're cheering for them. You can never give enough blessings, publicly or privately, for a child. And you think about with Jesus right here, Matthew 17, even Jesus got the blessing as a son from his father. Behold, a voice out of the cloud said to him, "This is my beloved son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." Hey, I love you, beloved son. I'm well pleased. I'm proud of you. And he says, you're really good at, listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. Like, you see all three affirmations right there in the scriptures. And I don't know how much of that was for Jesus as much as it was for us to understand how a father speaks to his children. Are you blessing your children? Are you using those moments? Because there's grown men dying to hear that in their own life. Maybe you've got adult children you didn't bless enough. Call them up. That adult daughter, and say, hey, I just want you to know I love you. The way you're working with your kids, I'm so proud of you. There was things I didn't even know how to do, and you're doing great with your kids doing those things. Like just looking for those blessings in their life, it can be powerful. Dad, I need you to adjust your leadership style to me as I grow up. So kids go through stages. And it's interesting when you look through this, from ages 1 to 13, you need to be your child's coach. Notice from 13 to 18, you change into being your child's cheerleader. And then on 18 on, you need to be your child's consultant. So here's what that means. The coach, early on, you call the plays and you execute, they execute the play. Like that's part of being a coach. You tell them what to do. But when you hit that 13 to 18 stage, when we're most tempted to coach them and tell them what to do is when they need encouragement more than anything else. And that's hard for us because they're going to make mistakes. They're going through hormones. They're going through girls and trying to figure that out as boys. Girls are trying to figure out boys. There's all kinds of stuff. And you just want to tell them what to do. But you start to control them. You tend to end up with rebellion as a result of that. But those early years, to be that coach, to be able to tell them the plays. Eventually, as they get a little older, you call in the plays and they've still got to execute it. But by the time they get to 13 to 18, that's when you need to encourage them. And then finally, you become a consultant. Consultant is invited in and given to give advice. And they can take it or leave it. That's what a consultant gives, Somebody brought you in as a consultant in your field. You give advice, then they got to decide whether they're going to listen to it or not. That's what our role is as dads. And then part I, it says, Dad, I need you to make some great memories with you. So there's often a direct correlation between the memories we keep from childhood and the lives we live as adults. Making it intentional about personal memories with your kids. What's the memory for this year? I'm going to make some memories this year. What are we going to do as a result of that? Because when you're relying on our deathbed and we say, I wished I would have worked harder. I wish I'd have, made that last sale in this department or something like that. No, it's the things that we don't regret are the things that are like making memories with our kids. I've been talking a lot about that with Amy because we're looking at some decisions to make. And it's like, how do we make memories with our kids? Because that's going to matter more in 20 years than this other stuff that we're talking about sometimes. And she gets it. She's like that. Family vacations can be important because of that. Doesn't mean you have to spend super amounts, but taking time. And a lot of kids remember vacations because they remember Dad was different on vacation. Dad was relaxed. Dad was, if Dad can get away from work, especially before cell phones and keeping us on call, but when Dad can be present, Mom can be present, kids love those vacations because they get that interaction, that FaceTime on an intense level through that. There was a story about this one guy. He was at his office, and it was a picture of him duck hunting. And somebody says, "Oh, are you a duck hunter?" And he's smiling. He says, "No, I've only duck hunted once in my life. My dad took me and we went one time." He said, "But it's one of my favorite memories I've ever had." And he just had a smile on his face. Those memories just bring back because he spent it with his dad to do that. And you might think, well, I can't afford to do these things. Be creative, Don't use that as an excuse to not make memories with your kids. It can be as simple as going in getting ice cream, one-on-one, a daddy-daughter date, or a father-son outing where we go and do things and we make memories together. Again, Dad wasn't around, but I remember one Wednesday night, I went to RA's at Cherry Creek Baptist Church. RA's is Baptized Boy Scouts is what I would call it. I don't remember learning much about missions, but I do remember playing lots of kickball, and I tied a few knots or something. That's what I remember about it. But I remember one night, they had these pieces of wood, and we were carving out crosses on it. And on the back, we just took a bottle, like a can top, bent it to make it like the hanger, to hang it on the wall, and then they sprayed lacquer all over it, and they tacked that on it. And I still got that. And I remember who did that with me. It made a memory for me. I kept it. Like, that wasn't an expensive piece of wood, that, metal top and some lacquer. It was not an expensive thing, but I'll never forget that. I still got it. And I was like 9 years old at the time. So making memories doesn't always have to be about, we try to blow it out with the big expensive vacation. Sometimes it's just the memory that they remember anyway. And so then we get into page 92. Dad, I need you to talk to me about God and share his word with me. Again, you don't have to have all the answers. You could say, I was reading, one of those smart moves is like at dinner time, at least once a week, share with your kids and your wife what God's been speaking to you about. What have you been reading in God's word? What did you not understand? What are you working through? What did you learn? How did God show that in your life this week? These can be times. Our quiet times are not just for us. It's for our kids to see. And also our quiet times are for us to be able to share with others when those moments hit. Your word have I hid in my heart. The Bible talks about to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within you is another passage where it talks about that. And they find out you don't have all the answers. Well, that's a relief because they don't have the answers. But you say, I don't know, but let's look into it. I'll ask Pastor so-and-so, or I'll do something. We're going to not leave it at the question. We get through that. So final thoughts as we're getting to the end of this. Guys, children are God's gift to us. And we feel that gifting most in two wow moments. I've only experienced one so far, that wow moment of the day they're born, and then the day they stand before us as mature, honorable adults. Sometimes we're like, wow, I didn't think we were ever going to get here, is what some parents say, Wow, God's really been gracious in my life to get to watch this extraordinary kid grow up in front of me. You did something beyond what I could have even invested in, and what a joy. And they're also children are our best long-term opportunity to better God's world. They're the arrows of change that we shoot. It says right here, like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. They're the arrows of change we shoot to shape the future. Again, long-term versus short-term. Thinking about the end game, that our kids, the things that we do with them now, really do set them up for a long-term understanding. And then when they raise their kids, it sets this thing in motion where generation after generation, they may not know your name, but you have impacted kid after kid after kid, grandkid, great kids as a result. There's no project you're going to work on, no talk you're going to give, no sale you're going to make that's going to live on longer than what you do with your kids and the future that you build with them. That's the truth of it. I don't know. Elon Musk might disagree with us because he's putting ships to Mars, but even that, I don't think that compares to what you can do with your kid's life. Teddy Roosevelt, of all people, who did all these amazing things, said kids were the most amazing thing I ever got as a blessing. So, bettering God's world as a result of that. And then C, children are ours to love and guide into becoming healthy, productive, God-glorifying adults. Such a responsibility. It will humble the smart dad. He knows how inadequate he is for the task. He knows he needs God to succeed, and that the reality will drive him to constantly call on God for his wisdom and help. God calls himself Father. You see that point all throughout the scripture. If there's anybody that understands our role, it's God. And so when we say, I need your help, I need your grace, I need your wisdom to be able to do these things. He's the one that says, I know how you feel. I know what it's like to have a child and to be a great father, and he wants to help you. So there's this prayer, and I'm going to invite you to read it with your group instead of reading it over us. But General Douglas MacArthur, he wrote this like a poem prayer. And I love that last part of the line as we get into this. So General MacArthur, he's got that big story, big, larger-than-life personality when you read about what all he did. But he loved this. Then I, his father, will dare to whisper, I have not lived my life in vain. He changed the world. But as a father, that's where he didn't live his life in vain. And so I'm going to invite you when we break off in just a minute to read that in your groups. And then when you get onto the next 2 pages, 94, 95, I want you to turn on over there. Notice there's page 94. That's our discussion for tonight. And then again, that Betterman question each week, you've been invited to put something down as a next step. On the next page, we're going to have our graduation, which is so much better than the word ceremony. We're just going to call it graduation. And we're going to celebrate. And so I want to invite you to select 3 of your Betterman action steps. You can go ahead and write it down right there on the Betterman plan, but I also made you some cards so that you can keep those when you're done. Think on those this week. Go ahead and write those down, but be ready to share your 3 with your group. We're not going to spend a long time next week, and there's no fill in the blanks or anything like that. It's going to be breaking off into groups after we celebrate. I ordered us some really cool challenge coins with the Betterman logo. They are not going to be here by next week, from what I can tell, okay? I did my best. I said, yes, 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 come on, send me the proof. Come on, let's do this. And they said it would take 1 to 2 weeks, and we're 3 weeks in. So I will get you those personally, because I want you to, the ones that have finished through this, that have stayed with it the whole time, I want you to have something just to remember it by. I hope you'll come back for more sessions. We're going to continue this journey together. You can sign up for the newsletter. I get that daily. It's got little, like a devotion, little quotes and stuff in that. But more importantly, that Betterman plan, 3 things to upgrade as a man that you're going to put in your pocket, put in your wallet, do something with it. You keep those 3, like you had that definition maybe taped up somewhere. These are the 3 things you're going to do as a result of this. This is the kind of stuff where it's great to get all the knowledge in the world, but if we don't enact on the plan, we're missing out. I still love General Patton, another general, but I mean, I try to live my life by this sometimes. It's like a good plan violently executed is better than a perfect plan that never gets put into action. I'd rather us violently execute these 3 steps. Stop worried about which 3 you should get. Pick the 3, like, I'm going to learn my wife's love language. I'm going to intentionally speak her love language once a week. You know, something like that. It could be on your wife. It could be your kid. I'm going to bless my children every week. I'm going to make memories every year. You know, you could do it from that way. Excelling in God's work, getting into God's word, all the way back through reconciling with dad, figuring these things out. What are those next 3 action steps that you need to take? I hope you'll use this time in the coming thing for the months ahead. And so we're going to break off here in a second, and I'll go ahead and finish with the live stream, and then we'll talk some details for this set of sessions.